a true fear of the left that would inevitably, from the collapse of capitalism, inevitably create a totally new hierarchy, a dictatorship of the bourgeois handing itself inevitably to a dictatorship of the proletariat, to handing the reins of control to a dictatorship of the proletariat. With the absence of some sort of left politics and some sort of left momentum, liberals won't make these allegiances with fascists. Did you see this? Yeah, I did. I've heard this before. And also, I also think it to a certain degree. I think I play fast and loose with fascism and Nazism in general. In terms of like ideology, there are obviously markers and limiters. Make the distinction between I don't make the distinction between like different variants of reactionary politics to that degree after a certain point. Having said that, Norm Finkelstein is not wrong. Here, let's hear what he has to say.
Here. Do you know why? Because there's no opposition. Historically, fascist elements came into power when there was a strong left. The institutions of what we used to call bourgeois democracy were in jeopardy, and the ruling elites acquiesced in a strongman coming into power in order to repress the elements on the left, which posed a real danger to their system. They wanted a socialist society. Some wanted a communist society. All of them rejected the capitalist society. We don't have a left here.
I both agree and disagree. I agree we don't have a left, but I disagree that fascism requires there to be a left. I think Norm's understanding, or Norm's definition, basically revolves around Norm's definition of this, or understanding of the situation, revolves around liberal capitulation to fascism, rather than my understanding of it, which is that liberals are I mean, I don't actually know, because he loves Stalin. He likes Stalin more than me, but I do think that liberalism is basically one step removed from fascism. It will always inevitably go back to fascism, because liberalism is predominantly tasked with the maintenance and continuation of capitalism. So as long as you want to continue defending capitalism, you are inevitably going to go back to fascism. So therefore, I would say liberalism is early stage fascism and takes many different forms. I don't think that there needs to be, in a country like the United States of America, I think Norm would say, understandably, that there is no real left, there is no left whatsoever, and therefore liberals don't actually have a true fear, right? A true fear of the left that would inevitably, from the collapse of capitalism, inevitably create a totally new hierarchy, a dictatorship of the bourgeois handing itself inevitably to a dictatorship of the proletariat, to handing the reins of control to a dictatorship of the proletariat. With the absence of some sort of left politics and some sort of left momentum, liberals won't make these allegiances with fascists and allow fascists to restore control, to restore law and order. The problem is, I don't think that there needs to be. I think that without any common enemies, fascists have basically decided that liberals are the communists, you know? With no real communists there that remains after the desolation, after the absolute destruction of left politics in this country, they've just decided it's actually the liberals that are the communists. Abraham Lincoln, who was a part of which party? That's right, the Republican Party. Democrats are the real racists. Now, it's the same exact thing. What they're doing here is the same exact thing. But of course, because so much of the intelligentsia is understandably liberal, this kind of misinformation goes unchecked. Let's take a look.
The idea that leftists like to team up with fascists, I guess. So I thought I would use these memes as a springboard to talk about some stuff. This video is not about liberals in the way North Americans think of them, in opposition to conservatives or whatever. This video is about capital L liberals, proponents of Enlightenment philosophies and liberal democracy.
Ryan Grimm tweeted this about a couple weeks ago. Everyone called him a tanky. Stalin signed Molotov-Ribbentrop after begging the UK and France to take Hitler serious and form a military alliance against him. They refused, and so Stalin was left to face him alone. So we cut this neutrality bargain to win. Time to ramp up military capacity, idiots. I like that this, which is like an accurate assessment of events, is considered to be tanky shit. And obviously, in the absence of like normal understanding of historical events that transpired, you can just kind of maintain this false position that claiming this actually means that you support everything that the USSR did. Okay. And it's so weird because it's anti-intellectual. Like, what you're doing is stunting intellectual curiosity. Okay. And it's insane because like these allegiances were done out in the open, whether it be the Munich Agreement or the period of appeasement, which is now obviously something that people are very critical of. As a matter of fact, they're so critical of it, they constantly use it in inappropriate historical contexts in contemporary foreign policy. Now, what's strange to me, however, is that the greatest thing that Stalin did, probably his greatest W of all time, like straight up, was defeating the Nazis. So that's kind of the whole story about World War II. Like what do you think happened there? You know what I mean? He just like the Nazis considered the Soviets and socialism to be the most significant enemy. Okay. The most significant enemy. The first people that they placed in concentration camps were socialists. Okay. Were trade unionists and socialists. They considered socialism to be a Jewish invention. Okay. So while you hear that from the Nazis and you hear that from the Soviets, you try to like laser in on this one historical agreement that the West also literally did. And you just, I guess, forget all the things that happened after this. Like, what are we talking about? Bro, who the hell said W. Stalin? I don't know. People who were freed from concentration camps all the way in Eastern Europe. Maybe those people said W. Stalin. A lot of people used to say W. Stalin. It's what Stalin did after that wasn't so great, okay? In terms of a lot of the mismanagement and the affairs of the USSR. It's like, it is his greatest W. What are we talking about? What is the second event of this first month? It is, of course, the assertion of the power of Russia. Russia has pursued a cold policy of self-interest. We could have wished that the Russian armies should be standing on their present line as the friends and allies of Poland, instead of as invaders. But that the Russian army should stand on this line was clearly necessary for the safety of Russia against the Nazi menace. At any rate, the line is there, and an Eastern Front has been created which Nazi Germany does not dare assail. When Herr von Ribbentrop, German foreign minister, was summoned to Moscow last week, it was to learn the fact and to accept the fact that the Nazi designs upon the Baltic states and upon the Ukraine must come to a dead stop. That's what Churchill said. Anyway, I love Ryan, but why is Stalin relevant right now? Well, for us, the reason why Stalin is relevant is because we're quite literally talking about a revisionist history from World War II that liberals like to that they love to fucking point to. Stalin killed 30 plus million people. Gee, I know. No, he actually, that's not true. He killed 100 plus million people. And also, no, he killed a 200 plus million people, actually. Never mind. I just decided he killed 300 plus million people. He's so much worse than the Nazis. Notice how there is also, at least in Europe, there used to be a term called the double genocide theory. The double genocide theory dictated, brought about by liberal thinkers, that it was actually, well, it wasn't brought about by liberal thinkers, it was actually brought about by fascists in the aftermath of World War II to make the claim that Stalin was actually just as bad, if not worse, than Adolf Hitler. Okay? You understand that, right? So whenever you do the, oh, well, Stalin killed 100 million people, ain't nobody saying nothing about that. You're actually doing the bidding of fascists. The reason why you're doing the bidding of fascists, not realizing that you're doing the bidding of fascists, unless you're literally a fascist yourself, is that if you look at the numbers on the board and you look at all the people that Hitler killed in concentration camps, that's like what, 12 million, maybe 15 million. Okay. Stalin killed 100 million people. That means Stalin is much worse than Hitler, right? Maybe Hitler was just a little guy. Maybe he was misunderstood. That's the way fascists propagandized. initially. Now they don't even have to do that because liberals have done the propaganda for them. Anyway, let's move away from Stalin.
Democracies. In case you're unfamiliar with the difference, I'll fill you in real quick. Liberalism is seen as the ideology born of the Age of Enlightenment, which was a period between the 17th and 18th century where thinkers and philosophers started to heavily emphasize.
If you understand that Churchill was on the good side of World War II, despite the numerous famines that he contributed to deliberately by design in the colonies, okay, then you should also be able to understand that it is totally appropriate and perfectly valid to say that that was a Stalin W. World War II was a major Stalin W, perhaps the most significant, most consequential Stalin W of all time. It is not an accident that, yes, people like Mandela and many other people whose perspective has been whitewashed have time and time again reiterated every party member must raise his revolutionary qualities in every respect to the same level as those Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. You're crazy as for think Stalin W? Yes, dude, I think that liberating the camps and defeating the Nazis was a W. It doesn't matter if it was Stalin who was doing it. It doesn't matter if it was Churchill doing it. And it doesn't matter if it was the Americans doing it. It's a W nonetheless. What kind of fucking ridiculous attitude do we have here? No, it's a good thing, okay?
Rationalism and empiricism in contrast to superstition and dogmatism. From there we saw an emphasis on personal liberties, separation of church and state, progress, tolerance, and democratic governance. Things that I think are great, by the way. This served as a turning point in history where the age of the monarch, the feudal lord, and the serf was to be left behind, and the age of the free man was to come. A lot of the ideas that came out of this Enlightenment period served to drastically improve the quality of life going forward. Since such an emphasis was placed on freedom and individual liberties, as tied to this movement was capitalism. At the time, capitalism was seen as a way to maximize personal liberties, a way for anyone to work their way to a free...
Like, I would go so far as to have endlessly more charity to our founding fathers here in the United States of America than I do to Stalin in terms of the American Revolutionary War. Okay, like those dudes were literally fucking slavers, man. What are you talking about? And I still give them that W for defeating the English. Okay, like that's crazy. That's crazy that like that is not only permissible thought, but like the fact that you even bring up the founding fathers being slavers is like a big fuck you to American history. But God forbid you say Stalin W for killing fucking Nazis. Like that's crazy. That's insane, dude.
Happy life and an improvement to feudalism and all the unspeakable economic arrangements that preceded it. During this period, capitalism was a very progressive system, but the people of the 18th century had no way of knowing how dangerous this economic model would be in its accelerated form. They couldn't properly gauge the ecological devastation or immense capital concentration that was to come in the next couple of centuries. There were some Enlightenment thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau who had a hunch that this shit could go wrong, and he wrote about it in his work, A Discourse on Inequality, where he took aim at things like property and wealth disparities and argued that inequality was likely to lead to despotism. But for the most part, the ideas that emerged during the Age of Enlightenment served as a massive step in the right direction. Fast forward to the modern day, and we see that Rousseau's predictions were spot on. But this doesn't mean that all the ideas that came from the Enlightenment were bad or destined to age poorly. As someone critical of capitalism, I believe that by implementing a new and more equitable economic model, we can truly live up to the values and ideals of freedom thought up during the Enlightenment. I see libertarian socialism as the logical extension of Enlightenment principles, but I digress. So, when I use the term liberal in this video, I will be referring to people or states that claim to be proponents of the ideas that emerged during the Enlightenment. The US and other Western countries claim to be liberal democracies, regardless if the party in power calls themselves liberal or conservative. This video is not going to be me attacking liberalism as much as it will be a critique on those who claim to uphold the ideas of freedom and democracy insincerely, just to use them as a cudgel to bully others who may want to organize their societies differently. There's a long history of nominal liberals acting illiberally, siding with authoritarians and discarding...
No, you don't understand. That was good, actually. That was good because the alternative was far worse. The alternative was a democratically organized socialist society. So, of course, we had to put a fucking fascist despot in charge and rewrite the Constitution. Like, what? Excuse me. That right there is neoliberalism through and through. As long as market interference is done at the behest of private enterprise, it does not matter if it is a monarch, a God-ordained king, or a authoritarian fascist that is in control of the country. Because as long as free enterprise flows and as long as the market interferences are done at the behest of private enterprise, it's A-okay, baby.
Regarding the values that make up what they claim to believe in, just to destroy countries and people who hold ideas different from them. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the phrase...
Who's that? His name is Pinochet.
And a fascist bleeds. This is a common catchword in certain political circles, and you might have seen it on the internet. People who use this phrase are often referring to the proclivity of past liberal democracies to side with fascists in their attempts to destroy leftist movements all over the world.
Another kind of Stalin banger take was when he said social democrats are social fascists.
Some will argue that the prioritization of property rights and capitalism are so intertwined with liberalism that liberals perceive an attack on capitalism to be an attack on their very freedoms, which then leads them to siding with the illiberal to defend their economic model. Put simply, the argument is that liberals will team up with fascists if it means they can destroy leftists because leftists threaten capital. In this video, we will test that theory and go over just 3 of the many times this has happened in the past century. After the Second World War, when the Allied forces secured the W and whooped those fascists' asses,
social democracy is objectively the moderate wing of fascism. Yeah.
Went on to lead the world into an era of anti-fascist resistance, and they did everything in their power to defend the ideals of freedom and self-determination for every nation on Earth. No, I'm just kidding. They did the complete opposite of that. They actually teamed up with the fascists that they just spent the past half-decade fighting because the threat of communism was a much more significant issue in their eyes. Unfortunately,
this video is 1010 no notes, by the way, straight up. I had no idea what this channel was, but insta subscribe, insta like, 1010 no notes.
This has always been the case. High-level officials like the OSS's Alan Dulles notoriously endorsed a Nazi proposal to establish a separate peace between the Third Reich and the US so that the Nazis could turn their attention toward the Soviets, whom Alan Dulles perceived to be a bigger threat. The US specifically has been unhealthily obsessed with communism even before the Second World War. Brazen, bold-faced lies that ranged from the
Scratch a liberal and fascist bleeds. 3 times they allied to fight leftists is the name of the video from a channel called Overzealots.
Bolsheviks are eating babies, to they're nationalizing women were espoused by US propagandists well before World War II. Operation Gladio ensued in the immediate aftermath of the war. Gladio entailed stay-behind fascist militias organized by NATO.
This is why I'm not exactly fond of NATO. For all the people who are always like, wait a minute, Hasan, why don't you like NATO? I don't understand. Like, we're supposed to be progressive, and Russia, especially in its modern iteration, is not progressive. It's illiberal. It's an irredentist force of evil. It is currently expanding its empire. It's a capitalist kleptocracy, which is true. All of those things are true. And NATO is the only way to fight back against it. I don't understand. Well, you know.
NATO powers and Western intelligence agencies like the CIA and the UK's MI6. These stay-behind fascist paramilitary groups were propped up and supported all across Europe for the purpose of destroying left-wing movements when and if they arose. See, once the World War ended and the Cold War began, a struggle for dominance and hegemony between the West and its allies and the Soviets and their allies consumed the globe. NATO was a military alliance that formed so that Western countries could better fend off the Soviets if they planned to invade Western Europe or attack America.
Not every petty bourgeois could become Hitler, but a particle of Hitler is lodged in every petty bourgeois. I forgot who said that. I mean, right after we talked about Stalin, how are you going to come in here and hit a Trotsky quote like that? It was Trotsky who said that. Chatter.
The threat of a Soviet invasion was dishonestly used time and time again by the West to excuse their own murderous and opportunistic behavior. In reality, the Soviets were heavily militarily damaged after the World War, and the act of them invading Western Europe or picking a fight with the US wasn't really in the cards. To quote from William Blum's Killing Hope, there are available, in fact, numerous internal documents from the State Department, the Defense Department, and the CIA from the post-war period, wherein one political analyst after another makes clear his serious skepticism of the Soviet threat revealing the Russians' critical military weaknesses and/or questioning their alleged aggressive intentions, while high officials, including the president, were publicly presenting a message explicitly the opposite. But that's another story. Remember the guy I just mentioned, Allen Dulles, the one from the OSS, which later became the CIA, who really wanted to cut a deal with the Nazis and direct all attention toward fighting the Soviets? So that guy made a good amount of Nazi connections while he entertained a possible peace agreement with them.
That's crazy. That's like, it's so shocking how that happens. It's a mere accident, I think, and totally not because they were simply less threatening.
One of these connections was not.
That's why I'm telling you, dude, FDR business plot, successful, the world would be so different. Okay, Stalin doesn't get the industrial backing necessary to keep waging this war against Nazi Germany. America goes to World War II, most likely on the side of the Nazis. I'm not like a great man theorist, but I do personally think that FDR played a pretty formative role in at least putting a stay on putting a pause on America's inevitable fascist development, which we're in it now, like firmly. But I'm saying that but he pushed it back at least, I don't know, 40, 50 years with that act alone.
Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen, who, knowing that the Nazis were going to lose the war, informed Dulles of his idea to form clandestine guerrilla armies composed of Hitler Youth and other fascists who would stay behind after the war to fight off communism wherever it popped up. Since Dulles was paranoid about a potential Soviet invasion of the West, he believed that he had to develop these stay-behind fascist militias and assist them. Dulles later went on to bring Gehlen and some of his other Nazi friends to Fort Hunt, Virginia, where they had dinner with a bunch of US officials who came up with a little plan. I'll let Paul L. Williams, author of Operation Gladio, a great book on this topic, explain what this plan entailed. Gehlen would go back to Germany under US protection and create the Gehlen Organization, which would receive full funding from US Army G2 resources. The primary purpose of this organization would be the maintenance of the existing stay-behind armies and the recruitment of new guerrilla soldiers from the ranks of Third Reich veterans with staunch anti-communist credentials. These soldiers would be known as gladiators, and they would be commissioned to...
And it all happened because of Pearl Harbor, so honestly, W Japan. No, I think Pearl Harbor gave enough momentum in the eyes of the rest of the American public for FDR to do what he wanted to do already, I think. I think I think Pearl Harbor was the turning point that allowed FDR to be like, no, we got to do something. This is crazy. Also, that chatter is joking. He's not saying W Japan for Pearl Harbor.
To ward off communist invaders in the great theater of post-war Europe. The operation in which they were engaged was to be known as Gladio, after the short swords Roman gladiators used to kill their opponents. So not only did the Western liberal democracy fund literal Hitler Youth death squads and other fascist paramilitary groups...
This is 100% true. There were socialists and trade unionists who died in the streets for the New Deal. It wasn't just FDR's generosity. I wasn't even talking about the New Deal. I was talking about FDR's actions during in the lead up to the World War II. It wasn't just about the New Deal. But you're right. You're absolutely correct in terms of the New Deal. It was pushed for by trade unionists and socialists who straight up died for it. And also, Pearl Harbor just offered FDR the broad recognition and permission to go to war at a time when there were plenty of Americans, like the German Bund movement, that actively was trying to keep America out of World War II and maybe even side with Nazi Germany.
All over Europe and directly work with Nazi officials to do so. But according to Paul L. Williams, the creative ways in which this operation was funded include illicit activities involving the Mafia and the Vatican. If you want more information on that, then check out his book. It's great. It's important to note that by 1987, an estimated 6 million people had died due to covert CIA operations, according to the Association for Responsible Dissent. The CIA claims these deaths were a result of a war against communism, even though a good deal of these killings took place in countries that weren't even communist, just merely a threat to American business interests. Gladio is far from the only instance of supposed proponents of liberal democracies teaming up with fascists to destroy the left. It's not even the only time they've teamed up with a former Axis power to fight communists. Shortly after the Japanese surrendered in 1945, the US began using the Japanese soldiers who were still in China to help fight the Chinese communists. At the time, China was engaged in a civil war between the communists led by Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, and the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek. Although the Chinese communists provided significant assistance to the Americans during the Second World War by offering intelligence on Japanese occupiers, rescuing and caring for downed US airmen, and more, the US ultimately chose to align more closely with
the Chinese communists were the most fucked over, okay? Number one most fucked over.
Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalists. The OSS, which later became the CIA, estimate Chiang's military effort was actually directed against the Chinese communists and not the Japanese occupiers who wreaked havoc all over China. Once the war had ended, Chiang had incorporated Japanese units into his army and began working heavily with officials who had collaborated with the Japanese and served in their puppet government. You would think that, having just fought a bloody and brutal war against the Japanese, the US would steer clear of aiding Chiang's nationalist army, considering it was packed with their former fascist enemies, but no. Since Chiang Kai-shek was relentlessly anti-communist, the US had no qualms about supporting him and his nationalist army. In fact, in President Truman's memoirs, he wrote about using enemy Japanese troops to hold off the Chinese communists. Quote, "It was perfectly clear to us that if we told the Japanese to lay down their arms immediately and march to the seaboard, the entire country would be taken over by the communists. We therefore had to take the step of using the enemy as a garrison until we could airlift Chinese national troops to South China and send Marines to guard the seaports." The US transported nationalist troops all over China and Manchuria. About 500,000 of them were sent by ships and planes in the attempt to get them to important centers and ports before the communists. The American involvement in the Chinese Civil War quickly reached the point of having US Marines sent into China to guard railroads, mines, bridges, and more for the nationalists. This eventually escalated to US involvement in the fighting as well. US soldiers began attacking areas controlled by the communists. There are also reports of them indiscriminately shelling civilian villages. An interesting detail that caught my attention while researching this conflict was the fact that even after the US troops attacked Chinese communists and the villages they controlled, the communists would still rescue downed American airmen and tend to their wounds whenever they would crash. William Blum chalks this up to the fact that, at the time, the US was internationally respected and admired, and Chinese peasants, communist or not, may have still looked up to the Americans. After a while, the US troops who were stationed in China...
It's so crazy. The American motion, especially post-World War II, is kind of wild because virtually everyone, including revolutionary figures that America considered to be enemies of the state, like Ho Chi Minh, literally consistently looked up to the Americans as like titans of enterprise / incredible revolutionary figures. Like the amount of glaze that everybody had for America, and America just cast aside that goodwill over the course of the Cold War by just being the most horrifying monsters on the global stage. Straight up, bar none. You can talk about all of the awful mismanagement, death, destruction within the USSR all day, every day. If you want to talk about that, they rode tanks into Hungary to quash the counter-revolution. How dare you, Hasan? Whatever. Okay, fine. But it is nowhere near the generational fumble of goodwill, or rather, if you want to have my opinion on it, the abuse of said goodwill that American leadership post-World War II used, weaponized at the behest of empire and complete domination and complete destruction. Yeah, Ho Chi Minh literally wrote a letter to America thinking we took our Constitution seriously. He admired the sentiments of freedom, but were dismayed when he finally visited America. Even after, he loved the founding fathers. He was like, yo, these guys are great. America's great. It's the land of prosperity and freedom. Can you please help us? And the Americans were like, help you? What the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, we'll help kill you. Or, well, we won't be able to, but we'll die trying in the process and kill a shit ton of civilians in the process. Also, another direct analog between the Viet Cong, which at the time was before, this predates, I guess, the terrorism designation, technically, but the coverage of the Viet Cong was damn near identical to the coverage of, you might have guessed it, Hamas. Okay, the Viet Cong are attacking and killing collaborators through ruthless torture. The Viet Cong How dare they attack our brave American soldiers for, you know, simply napalming a fucking village. The Viet Cong do not care about liberation. They want to kill the Southern Vietnamese. And the puppet government that we installed that was ruthless and brutal in and of itself. And also, to make matters worse, incompetent. All of this was written about extensively in American newspapers. And you might be shocked to find out college students back then were also on the right side of history, where you would sometimes see posters talking about how the Viet Cong were heroes that are worthy of celebration. Viet Cong also had terror tunnels as well. Anyway. Yeah. Mass condemnations. Do you condemn the Viet Cong? Condemn the Viet Cong, please. I'll never forgive Jane Fonda for going and posting alongside the Viet Cong and an anti-aircraft weapon.
Began to question why they were still in Asia and not back home. The Second World War had come to an end, so it was reasonable for these troops to be confused. The official U.S. explanation for keeping its troops in China was that the U.S. soldiers needed to disarm and kick out the Japanese, which did happen eventually, but the real priority of the U.S. military presence in China was to aid the nationalists and fight the communists. A chilling quote from a U.S. Marine lieutenant in 1945 goes, "You can't tell a man that he's here to disarm the Japanese when he's guarding the same railway with the Japanese." Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist army was notorious for its oppressive practices, harboring former Japanese fascists and acting cruelly to the civilian population. In stark contrast, areas under communist control were often characterized.
By the way, the successful version of like openly collaborating with those who collaborated with the Japanese colonialists happened in South Korea, just so you understand. In terms of like scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds 3 times they allied to fight leftists, it's actually not 3 times. It's virtually every time. America, historically, has never had an issue with aligning with brutal autocrats, okay? Always. There is no issue there. As a matter of fact, one might even say it's the modus operandi of the United States.
By honesty, fairness, and strong civilian support. Despite this, the U.S. fully, the world's worst leadership is what the head of the U.S. military mission in China called it, still chose to align itself with the nationalists.
Wait, hold on. I wonder where Chiang Kai-shek went to. Wait a minute. This video left out a key part of this story. What happened to Chiang Kai-shek? What happened? I wonder. I mean, I know he's not deliberately doing that. What happened to Chiang Kai-shek? Oh, yeah, he escaped to a little island, right? What was the island called? Unsubscribe? Wait, what do you mean? From Mr. Zealot? Yeah, a little island called Formosa. Because it keeps saying America aligned with Chiang Kai-shek's leadership. And I just don't understand how that leadership existed still. Oh, that's right. Cool things happened. Island where everyone got healthier. Yeah. No, definitely. Went to Taiwan, oppressed the native Taiwanese people, and declared it China too. Yeah, he didn't declare it China too. He declared it China, the Republic of China, and had grand designs for what the true boundaries of the Republic of China actually would look like in terms of like on a map. Both parties were interested in a unified China, but just under their own grand design.
Fairness, and strong civilian support. Despite this, the U.S., fully aware of Chiang's brutality, the world's worst leadership is what the head of the U.S. military mission.
Anyway, here, let's look at the Greek Civil War.
The resistance was primarily led by the ELAS, the People's Liberation Army. The ELAS was founded in the early 1940s on the initiative of the Greek Communist Party, and its guerrillas successfully fought off the Nazi invaders and liberated large areas of Greece. After a good amount of the heavy lifting was done and the majority of Nazis fled Greece, the British Army arrived in the country in late 1944. It's important to note that Britain viewed Greece as its private playground, so when the ELAS liberated it from the Nazis and began to usher in a new way of life, Britain wasn't too happy. The ELAS were progressive in many areas. They emphasized education and fighting illiteracy. They were also known for their somewhat
very, very unacceptable. That's the other side of like the current iteration of liberal politics on the global stage. Oftentimes, nowadays, when liberal countries, Western liberal capitalist countries, want to dominate other countries, they set up shop with like civil society organizations and NGOs ahead of time. And these civil society organizations and NGOs are tasked with combating the social repression born about oftentimes by, being historic victims of colonialism and other matters of empire, right? So there is definitely social repression. So the NGOs will now come in and talk about how woke, the country must be. And then they will create, decent propaganda to say like America's there to liberalize this nation by force and make it more socially progressive. Now, what's interesting about that is that at least historic communist movements have almost always been infinitely more progressive than their Western liberal counterparts. Literally always. Okay?
Progressive views regarding women and calling upon them to act autonomously and independently of their husband's control. This proved to be a popular movement among the people of Greece as the EAM, the political wing of the ELAS, grew into the millions. But this new worldview and disruption of the status quo was too much for Britain. God forbid Greece exercise self-determination, I guess. Churchill, who did not shy away from praising the ELAS as they were fighting off the Nazis and aiding the Allied cause, was adamant about restoring the Greek king as soon as the Nazi threat in Greece dissipated. The British military in Greece got straight to installing a government committed to their goals. This government found itself packed full of monarchists and conservatives who despised the progressive ideas of the new Greek left. The new Greek army and police force were also stacked with these rightists. This resulted in the deaths and imprisonments of members of the ELAS and EAM. Eventually, fighting broke out between the ELAS and British forces. The Brits had backup from non-ELAS Greek fighters, many of whom had actually collaborated with the Nazis during the occupation. So now, the Greek leftists weren't just up against the British and their new right-wing government, but they were also fighting these worked with the Germans and were now teaming up with the Brits. As the fighting went on, the US jumped in to help the British and the new right-wing Greek government, because if there's one thing the US loves, it's fighting commies. Things were looking pretty grim for the Greek leftists. They were stuck in a civil war against much stronger enemies, and the Soviets chose not to support them because Stalin thought their efforts were futile.
Listen, this is where I diverge with a lot of people who are across the board pro-Stalin. Some might say that Stalin was a little too predisposed with obviously recovering from World War II and was absolutely terrified of now opening up a new war against the Western superpowers that actually did not, in comparison to the USSR, incur penalties that the USSR got. And over again, Uncle Stalin made these sorts of moves, thinking, it's okay. We have to recover. It's okay. We have to recover. We have to do everything in our power to recover. Let's not read theory. Yeah. Disbanding the Comintern at the behest of Western leaders. Always being the last guy to help. To be fair, 20 million of your youth labor force getting killed is probably very difficult to recover from.
So they turned to Yugoslavia for aid, which supplied them with arms and sanctuary. As the British became preoccupied with trying to rebuild their own country in the aftermath of World War II, it became increasingly difficult and unwise of them to continue the fight against leftists in Greece, especially since the ELAS persisted relentlessly. They were not giving up in their fight. This led to the US picking up where the British left off.
Turkish political streamer Hasan says Russia should have invaded Greece. Yes, unironically. And then they should have invaded Turkey. What are you talking about? Yeah, the USSR should have both invaded Greece and Turkey. Hot take. Yes, my country too, please. Oh my God, imagine a communist Turkey. Holy fuck.
Little bit of liberal tag team. The government in Greece by this point was corrupt and still backed by the US and the British. It was known to terrorize leftists and torture them in island prison camps. Officials in Washington were fully aware that their client government in Greece was a human rights disaster, and even staunch American anti-communists were disgusted by it. By the end of 1947, American aid was entirely supporting the Greek military. This included weaponry, food, and clothing. Hundreds of millions of dollars of supplies and equipment was given to the Greeks by the US. The Americans even created a secret army reserve composed of those Greek Nazi collaborators I mentioned earlier. This freedom-loving harbinger of liberalism and democracy just couldn't stop teaming up with its old fascist enemies. The Americans became so wrapped up in the fighting in Greece that their involvement was no longer just funding and aiding the Greek military.
Wasn't Otto's socialist? No. What are you talking about? Absolutely not.
In their fight against the ELAS guerrillas. The US military mission eventually took over the development of battle plans from the Greek generals and sent over 250 American army officers to the country to make sure Greek army divisions were complying with US directives. By 1949, the US had successfully defeated the ELAS and fulfilled its goal to keep Greece as its little puppet state. The US remained heavily involved in the Greek government, with Greek prime ministers coming to power only after US suggestions or demands. This caused Greek politicians to grow upset at the American influence over their country and the lack of Greek autonomy. The US did not appreciate these troublemakers drawing attention to how much undue influence the US had over Greece, so in 1967 it supported a coup and a subsequent military dictatorship. Their best bet was to just get rid of democracy altogether, I guess. The fascist junta that took over Greece in 1967 ruled the country brutally until 1974, and it too enjoyed the support of the US. George Papadopoulos, the de facto leader of this junta, was on the CIA's payroll for about 15 years leading up to the coup and was a Nazi collaborator during the 1940s under the German occupation of Greece. Like I said earlier, this video is liberals. I don't see the point in that, but I do think it's important to shed light on past alliances between those who claim to be acting in the pursuit of spreading freedom and democracy when in actuality, they were just bullies and murderers. The ideas of the Enlightenment, freedom, reason, empiricism, democracy, they are worth protecting and upholding, but historically, those who purported to do so lied. Before I go, I would be remiss to act as though the Soviets never flirted with the idea of working with fascists. From the German-Soviet Axis talks, non-aggression treaty, to the supplying of Nazi Germany with raw materials like oil in exchange for German machinery and manufactured goods, this is behavior that modern leftists would never forgive or try to excuse if carried out by any other country. It's almost as though Stalinism, although extremely nuanced and impossible to properly touch on as a footnote, was chock full of mistakes and deviations from socialist principles. Now, this does not mean that leftists have some sort of proclivity to side with fascists, as some may argue, from the aforementioned ELAS and Greece.
Especially because socialists historically have been the only game in town when it comes to defeating fascism. That's just the historical truth. No matter how hard liberals tried to take credit for it and have successfully designed society in the aftermath, especially of Cold War, or during the Cold War as well, to move away from that reality.
Greece, who fought off the German occupation, anarchists in Spain who resisted Francoism, Tito's partisan forces who liberated Yugoslavia from the Nazis, and many more left-wing groups all across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Just because Stalinists entertained such a betrayal in the beginning of the war, although they more than made up for it on the Eastern Front later, does not mean that leftists haven't historically offered a natural, almost instinctive opposition to fascism time and time again. I bring this up because it's important to hold people who claim to be socialists to the same standard we hold others to. Resisting fascism should be a universal ideal, and that should not be a controversial thing to say. That's all I have.
True. Liberals speak to the individual particular in the name of the universal. All men are created equal means white land-owning men are equal under this law. Yeah. But yeah, if you're wondering how like America became so weirdly fascist when you got like the reincarnation of Henry Ford literally Sig Heiling twice on the day of the inauguration to a crowd of fans that are clapping alongside him, it took a long time to get here, but at least elsewhere, and even in the United States of America as well, because we did import a bunch of fascists here as well, Operation Paperclip, America very quickly was like, oh, we need to find the communist killers. Who are the best communist killers? That's right, the fucking fascists. Let's work with them now to fight off. Let's work with them now to basically fight off the greater evil, much greater evil, socialism. Yes, I saw that he tweeted at me and he said, someone tell Hasan the Hun I say thank you, lol. Why didn't the U.S. ally with the Nazis against the USSR then? I already gave you the answer. I mean, you can say it's a much simpler argument to make for at least England, right? But for the U.S., there was a lot of people who wanted to align with Nazi Germany. I believe it starts before that. Manifest Destiny sets up to be insanely individualistic. No, I've talked about this before as well. You're absolutely right, Carter. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure people much smarter than me have written about this, and maybe I've just never encountered it. But America was the proto-capitalist nation. Proto-capitalist nation before we even figured out what capitalism was, because of Manifest Destiny. Like permanent land grabs in the creation of the American state created this mentality where it was like there was permanent conquest to be had. It was like capitalism was the state religion and is the state religion in the United States of America because it was so perfect. It's so perfectly applied to American historical materialist development. I believe it starts even before that. Manifest Destiny sets us up to be insanely individualistic along the entire founding of the country being fuck taxes. All this bullshit of no representation isn't true. It's all about fuck you, I got mine. This was a huge topic I studied in college called Turn of the Century. We were built to be neoliberal. Mormons treat the Constitution as a holy document. Yeah. Can you define proto-capitalist a bit more? I mean, even circa the Industrial Revolution, Americans were doing a whole bunch of stuff. Like the settlers were doing a whole bunch of things that made it so, made them so open-minded to this way of thinking. This is my video. Thanks, man. Hell yeah, brother. Great video, by the way. Yeah. Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Matt Christman argued that England was the proto-capitalist state as we understand it in Hell on Earth series about the 30 Years' War in the 1600s. Well, we are the continuation. If the Byzantine Empire is a continuation of the Roman Empire, and technically the Ottoman Empire is a continuation of the Byzantine Empire, then America is the continuation of the British Empire. Depending on how far out you are, like if you are looking at hundreds and hundreds of years of history, I'm almost certain that in the future, we will absolutely look at the American Empire as a simple continuation of British Empire. I mean, if we are alive at that point. That's how I feel about it. Oh my God. Also defends that capitalism was born in England. Way too big to react, but recommend it. It's how capitalism conquered the world 5 hours long. That's crazy. Okay, brother. Ottoman Empire is not the continuation. That was a joke. But I like saying stuff like that because it immediately shows the fucking Eurocucks that still operate with the sick man of Europe mentality. Okay? I like that though, because it immediately exposes people because they're like, what do you mean? They were Muslim. Of course they weren't a continuation of the Roman Empire. Even though ironically they did consider themselves to be that. I understand why no Eurocuck would ever actually suggest such a reality. They won't even claim the Byzantine Empire as the continuation of Roman Empire. I'm from Chile. I was just joking. Constantinople and Istanbul, second Rome, Moscow the third. Yes, Professor Wolf's take that capitalism began in the Netherlands with the stock exchange is the most common way that the history of capitalism is taught. That's why people saying it actually started in England. England is the original proto-capitalist nation is somewhat alternative history. This is the common way that people describe how capitalism was invented. Just why Eric content is popping off on Red Nose, super popular. Damn, maybe I got to get into it. If Germany gets to call itself the Holy Roman Empire, then the Ottomans get it too. Okay, to be fair, Germans have nothing. So that's why they kept inventing, famously, different mythos for their country. Okay? They literally they just have nothing. All of it is made up. All German mythology is just made up. Hitler did a great deal of that, okay? Because he was so goddamn embarrassed to be descendants of swamp people, okay? Descendants of swamp people that lived in fucking mud huts, that like most of German history is just that he was like, I have to make something up. This is so embarrassing. We are literally swamp barbarians. We are literally Shrek, okay? We're Shrek. I looked at our history. It's all just Shrek. It's a nation of Shrek. What the fuck? That is so embarrassing. We got to make shit up immediately. All mythology is made up though? Yes. But at least the mythology that is made up is oftentimes made up of like long history, historical period, having some semblance of like empire or having some semblance of like a shared culture that spans across time and many different geographic locations. Germany, not much of that. That's why when you look, well, yeah, why do you think Hitler's doing a Roman salute, which already was an invention by Mussolini, who at the very least was understandably obsessed with Roman mythology because it's fucking Italy. You know what I mean? At least Mussolini had something to dive into to mythologize. The Germans didn't, so they just made a bunch of shit up. We're like, oh yeah, let's pick some parts of Nordic runes. We were Vikings, and also we were Romans as well. Ironically enough, the greatest W of German mythology is actually pushing back the Romans for an extended period of time, but. Literally, Caesar's writings describe the Germanics, the Gauls, and the Britons as like the same people, but they made their huts from different mud. Yeah. Barbarians, barbarin. Yeah, they stole a little, you know, they stole a little Hindu stuff too. Anyway, I guess when you think about it, America kind of does that too. I'm realizing, because 200 plus years is not that long. You know what I mean? Definitely do that shit too. America also has nothing in comparison to like think about it, dude. We shit on Iran or countries like Egypt or Greece, right? Poor nations, right? Poor nations now. But these are countries with so much history. Same with Turkey, Iraq, China. I mean, China is the most obvious one, right? Like thousands of years of history happened in these countries that they can tap into. It's an endless well. It's an endless well of culture, development, and moving history throughout time. And then, you know, when you look at America and it's like, yeah, we just kind of came here and killed everybody. And now we rule the world. It's pretty cool. Yeah, why do we have the fucking fasci? Why do we have the fasci all over our like government buildings? The fuck? What does that have to do with America? Made up. We put that in there to be like, yo, we're descendants of the Holy Roman Empire. Actually, it's like, what? Like, why? Why do we have the fasci? What the hell? I guess that's technically no different. Yeah, it's the same shit that Hitler did. Literally no different than what Hitler was doing when he was like, yeah, we actually totally are also the continuation of the Roman Empire. Please, we were not living in mud huts in the swampland. Don't you dare say that. Anyway, let's get back to what's going on in the world. This is